If it's tribal beats, Latin sounds, or holding down the tempo, percussionist Roger Squitero is your man. Coming up next in the Voodoo Room. How's things in New York? I mean, obviously,
everything's different now. Nothing is the same. I was doing a Broadway show when we closed down for the virus, the story of the Temptations called Ain't Too Proud. And since then, I've been up here. There are no gigs. Nobody's doing any gigs, except I've done a few music video compilation things. You know, you've seen those, I'm sure, on Facebook and stuff, where you got 18 people on the screen and everybody's playing and singing. And so I've done a few of those. But other than that, there's nothing happening work-wise. You know, in terms of professionally, I just don't see the music business coming back until there's some sort of treatment or cure.
Yeah, I think you're correct on that.
You know, maybe they can get some recording, but in terms of live dates, you know, clubs, concerts, Broadway, I just can't see it. I don't, even if they wanted to, I don't think people are going to risk their asses for entertainment's sake.
Yes, I agree. And also, it would be a big risk for any production company to want to put on something and take that financial risk, you know, because you just don't know how many people would be prepared to go out and actually experience a live show, considering there's no remedy out there at the moment. That's the other thing, I think.
Right. That's why I don't think people, until there is a remedy, either a cure or a treatment, I don't think people are going to want to go out. And, you know, in terms of my Broadway show, you know, that's highly based on tourism, you know, from around the world. The Broadway scene, probably like 60% tourists, you know.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, I'm just trying to live day by day, bro. I mean, I'm luckier than so many other people and so many of my friends. I have this house in the country. You know, I've got 2 acres and lots of gardens, a vegetable garden, lots of flower gardens, stream running behind the house. And on the other side of the stream, there's 2,000 acres of state-owned wildlife preserve that I can go fishing and hiking and canoeing. So it feels like I am like living in a country club prison, you know, like I did some white collar crime and, you know, I get an occasional day pass to go out and get food. But then I've got to come back to my beautiful little prison.
So if you're in the country there, is there a local country store or something like that? Or
Yeah. Well, for me, it's about 10 miles to a grocery store, and then about another 10 miles in the other direction to a health food store. So, and then there's a little town has a farmer's market on Saturday. So that's been the source of, plus, you know what? We're ordering a lot of food now that we never did that before. Like, there's been this company that we've been ordering duck from. So we're getting duck breasts and duck bacon, you know, and we're getting our wine delivered also. So all of this cardboard I have to deal. I feel cardboard and styrofoam. I feel bad about it. But it like piles up. So it's weekly trip to the dump to the, you know, recycling center. So that's the other trip I make every week is to the recycling center. I've got my little lifestyle down, man. Cutting the grass, doing my gardening, all these little house projects. And I'm managing to practice, you know. I'm managing, I would say I'm practicing not to the point of advancing my skills, but I'm like staying in place, you know.
Well, that's a good thing. At least you're keeping your hand in where you need to.
Yeah. I mean, it's never the same as playing a gig, you know.
Oh, no.
I'm sure that once I start playing gigs again, I'm gonna like be huffing and puffing. But I probably, for my own sanity, as much as anything else, I am playing just about every day.
So the Temptation show, did that complete in March? Is that when you stopped work?
March 11th was my last day. And I left the city March 15th and came up here, and I've been here since.
So what was that like just then leading up to traveling back
Well,
up to the country?
first of all, I was getting crazy those last few days in the city. It had hit the city. We're noticing every day, like the spread numbers, and we're starting to get nervous. And people are, talking in the theater. What do we got? When is this? When are we gonna? When are they gonna shut it down? And the various unions, like the actors were saying, well, our union equity is saying that, we're not comfortable with us having to perform every night. So I think something's going to happen soon. That was the last night I was there. And then, I went home that night, and then that night I got the message we're shutting down. And I haven't been back to the theater since then. Some of the musicians had to go back and pick up their instruments and stuff, but I haven't been back. And the guys that have been back to the theater told me it's so eerie because everything is just exactly as we left it. Refrigerator got cleaned out, but everything, like a pencil here, a drumstick there, looks like everything was happening and people just got erased. So it's bizarre. It's odd. This has never happened before in Broadway being shut down like this. And, none of us are really sure how it's going to work to reopen. I know that we have done 2 videos, and I think we're getting ready to do a third that, the producers are using and the publicity people are using to keep promoting the show. And the producers are telling us they have every intention of opening when we do open. I mean, when we're allowed to open. And so it's just a waiting game. So, yeah, man, what's going on there? How does Melbourne compare to New York?
I think it's very similar. We don't have the death rate that you guys have gone through, but we're in lockdown still. Or sort of lockdown. Everything opened up earlier this week, which I was just saying earlier to a friend of mine that I went down to the local shops yesterday, and I was shocked to see cafes running as per normal with people, tables of 5, 6 people on each table, and
wow,
there was no real precautions. It didn't seem to have much precautions from the outside looking in. There was no masks being worn or anything like that. So I think people are really relaxed about it in Melbourne, and they're not really because we didn't have that 100,000 deaths, and I don't think they realise how deadly this thing is, and they all think it's all pretty, it's just a flu type thing, and it only affects people in their 90s or something,
Man, no. In New York City, for a good month, we were having 400 people die a day.
Yeah.
Think about that, bro. 400 people a day for about a month. You know what I mean? It's and young people, middle-aged people, old people. It's not just old people.
Yeah.
And it can affect, and even if you survive it, from what I understand, you can get it again eventually. I think you might be immune for a month or so, from what I'm hearing, but you can get it again. And there's so many problems that it can cause that you don't even know about. So, I mean, young people that think that they can just, skate by because they're young and got a strong immune system. I mean, I heard there's 50% of people don't come down with any symptoms. But if you're one of the ones that do, you're going to get your ass kicked, and it's not going to be fun if you
totally
survive. And then you take it around somebody that's an old fucker like me, and maybe I don't survive. Thank you very much.
No, well, you're in a good place, mate. So it's good that you're keeping safe away from all the craziness, because I mean, this is all unprecedented, isn't it? We've got riots, we've got corona, we've got the civil rights thing has risen its thing. It's obviously it's been a problem in America for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Hence, what we were talking earlier about the 1967 shootings by the military, which you knew someone who was a part of that, which is you're the first person I've ever met that had any.
Only 4 people were killed, and one of them had gone to my high school. It was crazy, and so Well, I'm sure that formed a lot of my political consciousness. That time I was a young man, and so many of my beliefs were being formed. About the government and responsibility of a citizen, and because the Vietnam War was going on, and they were sending uh, kids my age off to die for no reason that seemed discernible to me and so many of my other friends and fellow citizens, and we protested. And since I lived in Washington D.C., and so the big marches were there, and so I went to the big marches, and I got gassed in 1968 March, so I know what that's like. And I also know that civil disobedience has a tendency to get people's attention.
What's it like to be gassed? I mean, I've never experienced anything like that, but what's it like to actually
It's
have
like your eyes and nose burn and itch at the same time. Your eyes are just stinging and watering and itching, and your nose and your throat, you feel like your throat has this super scratchy, irritated, you know, uh, just this, it sucks.
And that would have been unregulated back then because obviously there was no mobile phones to video the police or the military
That was
doing
the
that.
thing, right? There was no video, no cameras, so they could get away with a lot more dastardly deeds.
Which is what's been brought to prominence currently with the Minnesota situation, where luckily there was a mobile phone videoing these cops doing this to this poor guy, and we keep seeing repeated things like that in Australia anyway, that African Americans are targeted by the police and they're harshly done by, and it's just
Absolutely.
terrible.
And this has been going on for a long, long time. And, I just got off a Zoom meeting with my Ain't Too Proud band. We have a meeting every Thursday night at 8:30. So, it was obviously the big topic of discussion tonight. And, I have a lot of black friends in the band, and they're saying, how all this is just all the time. When they go into a store, they're being watched, and driving, and you see a cop behind you and you start to get all nervous, and it's just horrible. And there's a lot of white people out protesting in the streets this time too. It seems that this time might be different. Maybe systemic change may occur.
The consciousness needs to shift, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think the greater consciousness needs to shift.
Greater consciousness needs to shift all over the world.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing that this virus is doing. For one thing, is everybody's had to stop for a while, and people were able to see sky again and go, oh shit, look, that's what a blue sky looks like. Look how clear it is. We didn't even realize how much pollution there was until now. And
Yeah.
On so many levels, I think that's happening, both in terms of the environment, and just a lot of people have never been able to slow down. This is a forced slow down and stop. And I think for a lot of people, it's the first time that they've been able to do that in a long time, and especially because they don't allow themselves to. But now they have no choice. So I think a lot of people are actually really enjoying this.
I hope there's a lot of self-reflection during this period of time, because that's what we need.
Yeah, that's what we need. And that's what I think, at least among the people that I know, but the people that I know tend to be relatively conscious people anyway. So, conscious people are being more contemplative. And but I don't know about the bigger picture. I really hope so. I mean, it's if nothing else is clear, it should be that you can only mess around with Mother Nature so much before she just slaps your ass, and you may not recover from that.
Well, I think this is Mother Nature telling us something.
It is a challenge to humanity on so many levels. And we all may, you never can judge something too quickly. because something that may seem horrible right now, that when you look back on it in years, you saw that something amazingly great came out of it. So, and vice versa, if something great happens, you really just can't judge things too quickly. Only time will tell really what the true results of any big event are. And, we'll find out what Corona has done to the world and how it's changed. And look, man, for all of our sake, the United States presidential election's only 6 months, 5 months away, man. If we can get it to there and get rid of this fucking guy, at least we will stand a chance of being able to come back.
Because he's like Nixon on steroids, really, isn't he?
He makes Nixon seem like Kennedy.
I know, it seems unbelievable, right?
I mean, it's not only the fact that he is a grifter, he's a con man, and him and his family are like stuffing their pockets every chance they can get while they've got this power. But it's not only that, he's like totally incompetent to actually run a big business, let alone a country. And the other thing is that everything he's ever done, he's failed at. This is a guy that couldn't make money running a casino. I mean, damn.
Unbelievable.
How do you go bankrupt running a casino? You know what I mean? So this is a guy that is now bankrupting and destroying the whole fucking country. So if we could get rid of this pest, then we could start rebuilding, and maybe we can make a better country. Maybe we'll make it a more equitable. Maybe we'll make it more in balance with nature and stop raping the planet that we live on. So we'll see, bro.
Well, I'm hoping you got a candidate that's on the other side of politics that can actually challenge him, because I think that Biden guy, I'm not really sure about him, man.
I think Biden's going to do it because there are the people that just will not vote for that realize what a disaster this guy is and will vote for anybody that can knock him out. Then you've got people that voted for him the last time that have grown really tired of his shtick, and those people, they want to vote for Biden. I think Biden will be perfect to just kind of right the ship. Maybe he can just right the ship so we can get our footing for a minute, and join the international community again. I mean, half of the world leaders don't want to have anything to do with him, So we just need to get back to normal, and I think a lot of people will vote for Biden because of that. I mean, personally, I would have rather seen a more, progressive candidate. But I would take Richard Nixon again over him. I would take George Bush, who I thought was the worst president I'd ever seen in my life. I would be happy to have George Bush back compared to this guy. He offends me on every turn with his politics and his, he's an arrogant, self-aggrandizing narcissist. And everything becomes about him, and he is when you're running a country, you have to think about the entire country.
So tell me about your early years in San Francisco. What was that time like?
That's a great time, man. I've been thinking about that a lot lately because, like you were saying, we have plenty of time to ruminate. But so for me, it was my 20s. I just had so much fun in my 20s, and the good part of it was in the Bay Area, and the Bay Area had a very vital music scene. It had exploded in the late 60s, and it just continued throughout the 70s. Still had Santana and, Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane and all these various Latin and Brazilian music scenes clubs and stuff. So for me, it was just a gas, man. I was young, and my overhead was very low, and I could, just make a living playing in local bands. And I was in a band um, that was started as a steel drum street band, but evolved into something else. And just because it was a Latin and Brazilian band, was very popular in the Bay Area. So we worked enough. And then from that band, I joined another band, and that was called Nite Flyte. And it was a fusion band. It was it's kind of like, Chick Corea's Return to Forever band, with Flora and Airto. It was similar, two female vocalists. And so I joined that band, and they wanted to move to New York. So I did. I moved with them to New York in '77, and I've been there since.
So that 10-year period from what, 1967 to 1977?
Yeah, well, I was in San Francisco 70 to 77, but it really seemed like, because it was that point in my life, 20 to 27 years old, 7 years seemed like a lifetime. I found a couple of teachers to begin studying with, and started, developing my technique and learning about the music that I was interested in, and how to, how to be a Latin percussionist. My life was just about playing all the time, playing and studying, playing and studying. And so then when I moved to New York with this band, I was fortunate enough that the band could start working right away in New York. And, New York in the 70s was very vital music scene too. So it's very different from San Francisco, in that San Francisco music scene was, it was still kind of small and provincial, but there was work, and it was beautiful and sunny, and just kind of California, groovy Melbourne kind of vibe, And then New York was the exact opposite. It was dirty, it was loud, it was crowded, but there was a ton of work, and there was a ton of music, and it was a great period to be in New York. I mean, the city was dangerous, and it was dirty, but there was so much music, clubs, loft scenes, just, it was great, man. It really was.
I mean, you can hear that in the Latin music in the 70s. It was very prominent, wasn't it? The percussion element of music back in the 70s, whether it was contemporary music or Latin music, it really crossed over into more contemporary side of things.
Yeah, you're right. I think there was a real explosion in the '70s of, of Latin music coming into jazz and pop music, and so that was a good time for me to move to New York, because I started working with this band, so I didn't have to go through the adjustment period. If you move to New York as a musician by yourself, you have to meet people. I mean, you got to go and hang out in clubs. Hi, I'm new to town. I play bass. I play drums. I play percussion. Can I sit in? Can we jam sometimes? Is there any jam sessions knowing about? We started working in New York City a month after we moved here. This singer named Angela Bofield. Do you know who she is?
Yeah.
So Angela came to see our band. She just loved our band. And so she would come all the time. And she had just gotten a deal with GRP Records to produce they had just did a record for Dave Valentine. They were brand new. This is Dave Grusin, the great composer and orchestrator, arranger, film score. He started his own record company, Grusin and Rosen. And so they signed Dave Valentine, and then Dave turned him on to Angie, he was friends with, and they signed Angie, and Angie came to see us all the time. So she started hiring me to do gigs with her, and then she hired me to do her first record, which was produced by Dave Grusin. And so that was my introduction into a certain area of recording music that was going on at the time. It was kind of the precursor to smooth jazz. It it was coming out of fusion. It was fusion-y, but poppy too, like Angela Bofield, Dave Valentine, Tom Brown, all these great artists, blending R&B and jazz and Latin music together and pop music. And so once I got into Dave's stable, he started using me like to, do a lot of his records that the GRP artist had. And then he also hired me to be in his band, the GRP All-Stars, I did a tour with them to Japan in 1980. So yeah, that was a big boost for me coming to New York with the band rather than on my own. I'm going to be 70 in September. And I really feel that for the last 50 years, there has been 50, 55, 60, maybe this is a bubble of the music business that happened. And that bubble that we were living in, that time period, was just very fortunate because there's a lot of work, man. There was, lots of records, and record companies were putting money into artists and they back up their tours. And so there was a lot of tours, and, it was before drum machines. Yeah. So I'd get hired to do tambourine parts, jingles. I'd get hired to do a shaker, and so it was a bubble. I was lucky enough to have lived in a bubble of the music business where it was vibrant. I'm not so, I really don't even know what to say to young musicians these days in terms of encouragement,
Yeah, it's hard.
I wonder how different it's going to be. Well, until they solve this issue, music seems to be, more digital, stuff like this. Like I said, I've been doing these recordings, and Pete, I've been recording on my iPhone. And they've been using tracks that I record. Do you believe it? I mean, I'm like, how good is that microphone, dude? It is a lot better than I thought it was.
It's incredible, right? But see, that's not the microphone. It's because you're really good at what you do and you make anything. That's what I keep saying to engineers, right? And they never used to believe me. And I'd say, look, if you have the best microphone and a really bad, I'm not a very talented musician, that microphone cannot make that musician sound any better. That's the reality. But if you have a really good musician who can play their instrument, you can get a tin can and it will sound crazy, it will sound incredible. And they'll be going, what did you record that on? And all of a sudden that tin can will sell a bucket load of tin cans because they think they're going to get that. Right. They do. It's crazy. You've worked in a number of Broadway productions, including with Bob Fosse. What was it like working in Broadway?
Well, Broadway's, it's funny that, among Broadway musicians, there's a saying, Broadway, it's like playing music, but it's different. It's like playing music, but it's not. But it is. I mean, and see, the fortunate thing for me is I am not a classical percussionist. I don't play mallets, I've had to play some timpani in a couple of shows and maybe a little glockenspiel. But generally speaking, when somebody needs a full-on orchestral percussionist for a show, they're not calling me. So the shows that I get called for are usually groove-oriented and fun to play.
So more contemporary style.
More contemporary stuff. And therefore, the bands are a little bit different. Oftentimes, I've been very lucky that I haven't had to work with any wackadoo conductors because, believe me, that's a topic of conversation always among Broadway musicians about, how oftentimes you get stuck working with a guy that really shouldn't be there, because of politics. He is there, but not because he is a great conductor. So that can always be challenging. And oftentimes, because of the nature of what I do, I'll get called to a show that's on a click track. So if it's on a click track, you're pretty safe. It's pretty conductor proof in terms of, that, because one of the big problems with some conductors is that, they just don't know how to give you the great downbeat, the one, they're because, like a classical players, they have learned to follow the idiosyncrasies of conductors because they're just such brilliant musicians and they know music well and all of that. But if you don't have a click track and you have a conductor that's all over the place and the drummer's trying to follow him and he's trying to follow him on a video monitor and maybe even in another room. See, that's the other thing is, since Broadway shows have become more contemporary, sound men want to control the sound more. So the pits are often not open. It's not an open pit like in the old days where you had an acoustic orchestra and the sound they'd be in the pit in front of the stage and the sound would rise from the pit up into the house. Well, that's now you got, electric bass, electric guitar, electric keyboards, drummer playing really hard. And so the sound men want to control the sound better. So now people are getting isolated. So in my show, for instance, I am in a room with the other percussionist, Javier Diaz, and the horns have their own room, the three horns, and the drummer has his own room. And then the strings, guitars, bass, keyboards, they're all in the pit, but the pit's covered. So, that's one difference. The sound is, it's really, for me, it's more like doing a recording session every night than a live performance. And, but another thing about my show that I love, on this show, at the end of the night, the entire band puts on their white tuxedos and goes up on the stage, and there's a curtain comes up and it's a big reveal surprise to the audience. You've got an 18-piece R&B band on the stage playing in front of all this giant ending scene with dancers and singers. It's really great. So I get to play like the last 15, 20 minutes of the show on the stage, and then I get that wonderful roar of applause and feedback and energy coming to me every night. That's a rare thing on Broadway because most of the time you would go in, you do your job. Nobody really says thank you or yay or applause. You hear applause, but it's not really, it's for the show. You don't feel a sense of appreciation, and then you leave. And then you go out on the street and there's 4 billion people taking up every inch of the sidewalk, and you're walking out in the street and dodging cars and, noise and sirens and people everywhere. And you just like try to get home as quick as you can and get away from the insanity.
Yeah, sure.
So that's kind of what Broadway's like. But I would say this, in my show, I do get that live performance sense every night with the audience. And I happen to be in a band of amazing players, really, really good band, and great music. I mean, the music of the Temptations is just, it's so many hits. I mean, the whole show is one hit after another.
Yeah.
And
you tend to forget how many hits they really did have, and they're all familiar. It's all very familiar music to a lot of people.
Absolutely. So it's a real good, it's a feel-good show. There really is drama, and there's death, and there's drugs, and there's friendships breaking, and, all the type of rich stuff that happens in life, but with the soundtrack of this music from the 60s and 70s that a lot of us grew up on and loved. So it's a fun job, and for me, and I miss doing it. And I probably won't be able to do it for a year.
So they were from Detroit, yeah, the Temptations.
They're from Detroit. They were Motown's like maybe second or third act.
Incredible. Some of the music that came out of Detroit during that period of time, just incredible.
Yeah, because it was a melting pot, because the early part of the century, in 20s in particular, there was a mass movement of African-American people from the South to the North to get away from all the racism as much as they could. And Detroit was a factory town. They had the cars, they were car. And so a lot of African-American people from the South came up to Detroit. So you've got they're bringing the Delta Blues, like same thing in Chicago. They're bringing the Delta Blues, and they're bringing jazz, and rock and roll is starting to develop a little bit. Doo-wop, and doo-wop was heavy in Detroit, and that was so there you got this fertile field, and the right time, the right place, and all this great music came out of that period.
I mean, when did that fizzle out in Detroit? Was that in the early 80s, do you think?
Yeah, I think, the auto industry started going to hell in the late 70s. The cost of gas was going way up in the late 70s, and Detroit was still making these big clunky fucking cars, and Japan and Germany started offering alternatives, smaller, cheaper, and they just killed the factory, the car factory scene in Detroit. That was kind of the beginning of it, and I would say it really went down in the 80s.
Your drumming circle, are you still doing the drumming circle?
No, I'm not doing that anymore. I was doing that in the 90s, the early 90s, because I had to figure something else out, because I was going from being a studio guy. Now, I'm like being clobbered by the drum machine. My jingle work in particular, went down 70% with the drum machine, and so this was before I had done one Broadway show in the mid 80s, but that was just kind of a fluke. That was the Fosse show. And but at that time I was really more of a touring and studio musician, but my girlfriend at the time was in that show. And so she just talked the contractor into hiring me and said, well, come on, it'll be fun. We'll be together. And so that's what got me into it. And then it didn't last. That only lasted a few months. And then I was back, out touring with Michael Franks, and I didn't care. So, but then by the early 90s, work scene was really changing in New York. It was far less studio work, less touring work. And it was really before I started doing most of my Broadway work, but I had to figure something out, and the drum circle thing was becoming a thing. And there was this off-Broadway show called Stomp. Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah, I have heard of it.
It's like a percussion show. It's all this dancing and drumming using broomsticks and all kinds of weird shit and choreographed. So I saw that show and I got the idea, well, maybe I could put a drum circle thing together where people didn't have to, learn technique. You don't have to learn how to hit a drum to be able to participate in a drum circle. So I created these instruments. I made them, a lot of banging on the floor type of instruments. And LP had supported me a little bit. They gave me about 40 pairs of maracas and shakers and stuff like that. And so my idea was that as a team building exercise for corporations, since if you would bring a bunch of your team from your corporate headquarters, and now everybody's on the same footing because none of them are drummers, so especially if you've got your bosses and management and employees doing it together, everybody's on equal footing. And the whole idea is that you're going to build something together. The thing that you're going to build is a rhythm. And I'm going to give you the parts, teach you how to play simple parts, and put all the parts together so the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So the idea being that when a rhythm locks, it all of a sudden starts generating a certain vibrational power. And that vibrational power can be really exhilarating if you're participating in it. So that was my idea. And it was a good idea. And it was fairly successful. The problem is that I really needed a partner who would be the seller, who would call up the relations department of a corporation. I forget what the name is now, but so they would call them up and try to sell them on the idea, how much money you got, where can we do it, all that sort of shit. I just hated doing that, man. So I did it, and it was helping to supplement my income. But then by the mid 90s, a couple things. One, I started doing more Broadway shows because I found out about the pension, musician's pension, and how much doing a show every night, you're making a contribution to your pension. And so if you get a show that runs for years, you do that for years, you can really build up your pension. So when I learned about that, I was like, okay, that's it. That's what I want to do now. And so I started focusing on, I'm getting hired more. And so from the mid 90s till now, I've been doing, off and on Broadway shows. And sometimes I've worked for Cirque du Soleil a couple times. But then I have my touring as well, I toured with Luther Vandross from the late 90s until he had his stroke in 2003. And Vanessa Williams and various other artists, still doing little concert stuff work. And so that's kind of it, bro.
So what was the most memorable tour you've been on, and why?
Well, I would think for me, it would be that Dave Grusin GRP All-Star Tour to Japan. And couple reasons. One, it was a phenomenal band with Marcus Miller on bass, Buddy Williams on drums, Dave Grusin on keyboard, his brother Don Grusin on second keyboard, Bobby Brown on guitar, Dave Valentine on flute, Sadao Watanabe on alto sax, and Tom Brown on trumpet. And so that was the band, but we augmented it with the Osaka Symphony Orchestra, and we did a live record in Osaka with the symphony backing us up. But Sadao Watanabe was like, he's such a huge cultural figure there that wherever we went, we were like, we just got the royal treatment. Whatever city we went to, people would be taking us out for these great meals all the time after the show. And it was, really high profile. We did a live album. It was only about 3 weeks, but my God, it was just so much fun. Yeah, that's probably my favorite. Yeah.
So how did you get involved with Cirque du Soleil?
I did this Broadway show Tarzan in New York. After it closed, the drummer, a guy named Gary Seligson, he got a call kind of in a panic because Cirque du Soleil they were about to do this show in Madison Square Garden for a couple months called Windtuck. It was their winter show. And they were going to do it just with track. And I think they had a guitar player and a bass player and tracks. And it wasn't working out very well. They weren't happy. So they decided to hire a drummer. And Gary got recommended from somebody that knew him from the Broadway scene. So he did it that year. But then they were coming back next year and they really wanted a drummer and a percussionist. So he didn't take the gig, but he recommended me. He said, yeah, you got it. So I did that. I worked for them and I did that show for 3 years usually from October to November to January at Madison Square Garden. And then they had another show that they brought into the Beacon Theater. They wanted it to be a permanent show running in New York City. And so I was like, they asked me to do it. And I was like, great, because that's just what I wanted, a permanent show. Because usually Cirque du Soleil is usually impervious to reviews. Doesn't matter whether they get a good review or bad review, they're going to be there as long as they want. Well, that was not the case with this show. This show is really terrible. It was called Banana Spiel, and it just was not doing good business. They closed it down after a few months. So that was the end of my experience with Cirque. But I worked for them for about 4 years in a row, and you know, I got to know Montreal a bit, and yeah.
Yeah, because I worked in a circus very briefly in the mid 2000s. I toured Europe, all across Australia. I did it for about a year and a half, but my experience was quite tainted because we had no money, and and the equipment kept failing, and it was just a nightmare for me, because it was just it's our premier circus in Australia, but in comparison to Cirque du Soleil, it's like a tricycle, where
Yeah. I
it
thought
really
Cirque
is.
was a very well-run company. I mean, they, I always felt that they were very fair, but there would always be like, on the one hand, this sucked. It was horrible. But then on the other hand, this was great. So it was always like that kind of, this sucked, this was great. So it always kind of evened out, and I felt that they were pretty conscious and conscientious company. So I enjoyed my time with them, but I never toured. You see, I couldn't. I'm too old for that kind of fucking touring anymore.
Yeah. Was Richard Lepage, was he producing some of the shows back then?
No, not my show, not the shows I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, do you produce your own music, and who do you collaborate with when you do?
I had a studio in Manhattan, in the basement of this big old building, and that studio got wiped out in the Hurricane Sandy. Must have been 2012. I got flooded out. There was a hurricane and flooded the entire basement of this building from floor to ceiling, and my whole studio was ruined. And I never really put another recording studio back because I just was so busy in those years. And the other thing about doing Broadway is, I got to say, is that it's a marathon. It's anywhere from 5 to 8 shows a week, and it's just in Times Square, which is the most tiring place you will have to go to. It's just loud, crowded, and it wears you out. So I found that all these, in the 2000s, well, especially from 2010 after the hurricane, I've just been so busy working that I never kind of was able to get my energy back to being focused on building a new studio, getting new mics, getting a board, getting, all of the stuff you need to do. I just said, fuck it. So I haven't really produced much in the last 7 or 8 years or so. I collaborated, the last album I did for myself, I collaborated with another percussionist, as a matter of fact, the guy that I'm doing this show with, Javier Diaz. And we also did Tarzan together. And when Tarzan closed, we realized we had such a great connection, such a great groove together. We said, let's do a record together. And so we started writing, and we wrote a record and produced it ourselves. And at the time we were thinking we were going to be an entity. The band is called Tribal Sage. And the record we did is called Behind the Mask. And, it kind of coincided with the death of the music business. And when music became free, and then budgets like disappeared, from an average $60,000 jazz pop or R&B type of, jazz record, 60,000 was easy to get, now. And then it went from 60 to 30, and then 10, 12. Well, we could, we don't have any money for you, but we'll distribute it for you, and we'll take this percentage of your sales. And but what sales? Because once your record ends up hitting the internet, often the sales dwindle if unless you're a major act already. So I was just kind of got happy with being able to do my Broadway shows, which I can make a living on, and also fed into my pension. And then my jazz gigs with like John Lee and other cats that I can actually play some music that I really love and get to travel a bit and, not have to make a living being a jazz musician, but just as a sort of augmentation and do it for the love of playing.
So are you still playing with Dizzy Gillespie All-Stars? Are they still touring?
Yeah, well, we were till the COVID hit. Matter of fact, we were supposed to go to Shanghai and Beijing and then over to Tokyo, Blue Note, do all those Blue Notes. And so, yeah, obviously that got canceled. And we went to Istanbul, man, and in February. That was my last international trip, and it was already getting a little hairy in those days, and it was really weird because Tommy was sick as a dog. I think he just had a regular flu, but we've talked about it, and we wonder maybe he actually did have it, but the corona. But
yeah, right.
Anyway, Tommy was sick as a dog on that trip. And that was like February 26th, 28th, something like that. And then we got back and we had a few dates to do at the Blue Note in New York. And then like I said, China and Japan, and then everything got canceled.
What's the Blue Note like in New York?
It's relatively small. It's like long and thin. It's not a great shaped room for a club like you guys, like the Bird's Basement was. A great size and shape. This is like long and thin, so the stage is facing a wall. There's not a lot of people between walls. Everybody's to your right and to your left, with the bar where you come in, and upstairs is the hangout. The dressing rooms, and food's pretty good. I've always loved playing there because I can walk from my apartment, and it's in a part of the village that's just really blocks from where I live. I've always liked that about it. Yeah, people are nice that work there.
Yeah, great.
But Pete, man, it's great seeing you. Great
Likewise.
Talking to you.
Thank you, Roger. Take care.
I'll look for you on Facebook. Be safe, my friend.
You too, mate. Thank you for your time.
All right, bro.
Free when voodoo strikes. It'll tear apart your head when voodoo strikes. You wish that you was dead when voodoo strikes. It'll tear apart your head when voodoo